Live from the Room of Mirrors studio, you're listening to Foster Brothers on Point. Turn your selector switch to the fire position. The show is now live. I'm Hayes Foster. My brother Stephen Foster is here. We're the Foster Brothers. We're your hosts for the radio show tonight. Tonight we're going to discuss fear, specifically how fear can be used to manipulate and control large populations. I guess that would lead us in. We need to define fear itself. Fear is defined as a distressing emotion aroused by impending danger, evil, pain, etc., whether the threat is real or imagined. Fear is a defensive emotion that allows humans to recognize threats or potential threats. Fear is not necessarily bad, however, it can be used to control people. Fear also encompasses the physiological responses in the body, such as rapid breathing, increased heart rate, even an adrenaline release can occur from perceived fear.
That's right. And fear, kind of can affect your rational or, your decision making. Sometimes that irrational fear is called a phobia. Some days we see, people have phobia of certain insects or spiders, snakes. But sometimes, fear can also come from people that people impose. Some people can have fear at the workplace. They're scared to go into work because they have a mean boss that is irrational and, rules with an iron fist, thinks that they're running a slave shop.
Yeah, in recent history, I believe we can see how governments, particularly the U.S. government, has used fear really predominantly since, I guess you could go back to Oklahoma City bombing. Since 9/11, 2001, there was a lot of fear-mongering going on after that. And, let's look at a current clip that's very recent about fear in the United States, particularly New York City. Let's cue it up.
Russia's actions are a problem. They don't pose the number one national security threat to the United States. I continue to be much more concerned when it comes to our security with the prospect of a nuclear weapon going off in Manhattan.
So there you've got Obama talking about just this past week, his one of his primary fears, or the fear that the American people should be concerned with, is a nuclear weapon popping off in downtown Manhattan.
That's right, Hayes. Obama was there at the Hague discussing this, discussing kind of Putin and getting into the threat of nuclear war. But, he wants to draw attention to local terrorists. He thinks that there's a terrorist on U.S. soil that is walking that's going to execute, terrorist act. And, the implications of that would let everyone know that there's terrorists among us and something has to be done about that. That is the underlying theme, that we're among terrorists.
And that just shows how the state must maintain somewhat of a state of fear so they can get by with, whether they're infringing on your rights, your God-given rights that are guaranteed in the Constitution and Bill of Rights, to, just being able to spy on whoever they want to through the NSA spy programs that was authorized through the Patriot Act. The reason we're discussing fear is because, not only does it, it's used to control populations, it's also used to keep people in a constant state of non-growth. It keeps them, in their personal lives from growth, maybe fear of, whatever it is. Not having insurance keeps you from starting your own business, taking investments. It just keeps everybody kind of at a stalemate to an extent, and that's just on a personal level. Where that's not even taken to the level that the social engineers use it at, which is controlling ideas and fear in a mass population, which is kind of the apex of social engineering, being able to control large populaces. Tubbs?
That's a good point, because this show's dedicated to the fear mongering that the government does in order to pass certain laws and regulations, and also to keep us at a constant kneeling position to the government, because they know best. They have knowledge that we don't have, but they know about, and they're warning us constantly, and we have to yield to whatever they say. But really, what you're bringing up, Hayes, is something on a personal level that really affects everyone. And if you're scared, start a business. If you've always had a dream to start, say, a photography company, but you're scared of the taxes and the financial debt you might have to go into for a startup, that keeps a lot of people from doing it. I hear tons of people when I talk to them about business, is they say, man, I wish I could do that. I'm just scared of, X, Y, or Z. I'm scared of the money, the financials. That's probably 98% of the people out there. They're scared to act.
That's correct. And I will say this, just from, my experience on doing the radio show, we cover very controversial topics. We're covering social engineering and the use of fear in social engineering tonight. Before we even started the radio show, I will admit my own fear. I was thinking, there's a lot of radio shows you can tune into out there that are nationally syndicated. Ours is not. However, we won't water things down because of political affiliations or sponsors. We're just going to come out and tell you what we think about any given subject, and that is something that's unique in the radio business.
And, a lot of the mainstream people like Savage or Alex Jones, is when they present something that's really controversial and could potentially end a politician's career, there's always that threat that there could be retaliation. Breitbart comes to mind. He had a rare heart attack. There's a few other people. Who was the one that was in the Mercedes car crash that exploded on the tree in, I think, Hollywood area?
Oh, yeah, I know.
His name was Michael. But some people, can hide behind their popularity and their celebrity like an Alex Jones can. But for people like us, we're really at the grassroots level, broadcasting information, where if we disappeared tomorrow, no one would really mess us, to be honest with you, besides, our friends and family. But, so we do take great risk in bringing this information, because we research it and we try to fact find. And the information we're revealing might not be fully, the evidence might not fully be there, but you have to look at big picture. It's like a puzzle. You put 10 pieces into a 12-piece puzzle, and you can kind of see what's going on, and that's what we're bringing you here. But we're talking about a lot of facts too, and we have fears too. Retaliation from government agencies,
and that can happen at any point to anyone who tells the truth. Let's move on to the attacks on 9/11, 2001. That event is burned into most Americans' minds. Many Americans can remember what they were doing, what job they were working at the time, who they were with when the planes were flown into the World Trade Centers. After the 9/11 attack on New York, the War of Terror was officially on. The military-industrial complex began ramping up and making a lot of money. And just, probably when I say 9/11, you probably picture the planes blasting into the World Trade Centers. And what that is that's now burned into your psyche. It's an archetype event that you can replay over and over in your mind. And when I say 9/11, that triggers you visually in your mind seeing those planes flying into the buildings. And you know, on a large level, that's considered programming of fear. Because now when someone says terrorist or terrorism or the war on terror, that's the trigger word that should bring up those images in your mind. And there are people, think tanks, that spend a lot of time and money, and they know exactly when you say the war on terror or 9/11 that those do invoke those images and the accompanying emotions.
And that's like mirroring fears. Our fears are portrayed through sources like books and movies. And for example, many horror movies and books include characters who fear the antagonist of the plot, or whoever the villain of the plot is. Fear is also found in mythology, folklore, and then the folklore superstition. And one of the important characteristics of the historical and mythological heroes across cultures is the fearlessness, and the face of the lethal enemies. And I think that's what you're talking about 9/11 is it's a snapshot, and it's a known fear. They've created a monster. Whoever did the attacks on 9/11, they've created a new boogeyman.
That's right. And it's history, and it's burned into everyone's psyche right now, and it's a easy trigger for social engineers to manipulate. And let's pause for a moment, and we're going to hear from our sponsor. Foster Brothers On Point would like to thank My One Supply for making the show possible. MyOneSupply.com, suppliers of fine firearm and tactical gear. MyOneSupply.com offers brands like Magpul, Eberly Stock, Trigicon, EOTech, and many more top-shelf brands. MyOneSupply.com offers genuine military surplus and survival items. From the battlefield to your front door, check out MyOneSupply.com.
Getting back to fear, Hayes, and you were just mentioning, the Patriot Act and, how they could, take our freedoms away from an event like 9/11. And 9/11, if you think back to it, I remember seeing it, and I wanted to join the military right afterwards. I wanted to take action. For a lot of people, they did join if they were at the right age, and for some people, they couldn't join, or they were too young, or they were too old, had a career. But they wanted something to be done. That's why so many people signed up, is they wanted to see action. And for a lot of people, thankfully, the government did take action. But maybe it wasn't the action that we all really wanted.
Yeah, the Patriot Act is kind of the, or Unpatriot Act, as a lot of people refer to it. It was kind of like the bastard child of the 9/11 attacks. And it was essentially pushed through because at that time there was still a lot of emotion. And I guess as we've seen, emotion from an event can be used to garner the opinion of masses, such as Sandy Hook, the Aurora, Colorado shooting, and 9/11. You just see the momentum. Now, sadly, when you're using deaths to push forward an agenda, whether it was the Patriot Act or the Connecticut gun control laws that are currently being defied in Connecticut, sometimes emotions aren't the most rational way to make decisions, and unfortunately lawmakers prey on these kind of situations because they know that there's potential momentum there to do things politically and with laws that would never have been available to them under normal circumstances. Like I said, the Patriot Act, a lot of people call it one of the most unpatriotic acts of modern history. The only thing that I think compares with the Patriot Act would be the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, which the Treasury Department lost control of the monetary system in the United States of America. It's that monumental as far as the abuses of power, personal liberties that are protected by the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Well, supposedly protected. Nowadays they're more ignored than anything else. And it's almost like this strange worship of government and worship of the state has come across this land, as if no one thinks that they themselves as an individual are important. They just turn over all responsibility to the government, and that's a dangerous position to be in.
I remember when they were first building the Patriot Act, they weren't going into so many details that it just that this was going to, help law enforcement do what they wish they could have done on 9/11. But when you go back and look at the facts on 9/11, which that's got to be a totally different show. But there was a lot of government officials that had their guard down because they were doing a training session, joint training session with Canada. And, as it was occurring, there was, the thought that maybe this was part of the training, because it was training for a terrorist act with planes flying into buildings. So when you're training for it and it actually happens, it's kind of hard to say, hey, this actually is happening, even though they said it was training. But I don't recall when this was all going down that they were going to be surveilling my cell phone, that they were going to be surveilling my internet usage, they were going to be surveilling any sort of digital communication. And, this is not only that, but, surveillance, from setting up sound recording devices on your personal property or premises.
So when you think about the Patriot Act, I'd like to put a social engineering trigger into your minds as the listener. Let's just call it the Unpatriot Act, because that's what it is. We lost a lot of freedoms and a lot of infringements on guaranteed rights when that passed. And I think Benjamin Franklin said it pretty good, and this is a quote: those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. And I think that's true. That holds true to this very day, because as an individual, you can't put all your faith in a all-powerful state, because they're humans. These mechanisms that we call government are run by humans, and they're going to make mistakes. They're going to be flawed to an extent, and it's just a dangerous position to be in with a lot of these illegal wiretaps. Apparently, we all know Snowden. Edward Snowden blew the lid off of a lot of the things that the NSA were doing. He was a former contractor working for the NSA, and with the information he's released, every single piece of digital information, from email to phone calls to text messages, it's all being recorded. Now, obviously, we know there's not the manpower to physically listen or read every single piece, but it's being recorded, it's going to server farms, and they can go back and they can look at it. And I know some of you out there are like, thank goodness, that keeps us safe. Or does it? Does it open the door to possible corporate espionage? Think about if your company is on the cutting edge of a new technology and somebody within the NSA says, oh, I could pull this, sell it to their competitor in the free marketplace, and make a lot of money. So there's a lot of unintended consequences going on, and you don't hear a lot of talk about that in the media.
That's right. I mean, you might be hanging out at the New York City Men's Club spa, and you might meet some friends, and next thing you know, they're telling you about how they did some acquisitions of smaller companies, and they've got a guy that you need to talk to. And you're like, what do you mean? Well, he can just get the information. Later you found out that it was a connection to the NSA. These are the sort of things that are actually having a negative effect on our society.
And, also, and a lot of people, the Freedom of Information Act that allows requests of information, that are controlled by the federal government, which we're the boss, but I guess things have changed at this point, and they think they're the boss. Anyways, we won't get in that too much, but I think we all know what's going on. The best way I can think of the documents that have been released by the Freedom of Information Act, think of it as going to a car dealership, the dealership being the government. You're looking at a beautiful car, you're admiring the exotic curves. Then you ask the car dealer, you say, hey, what's the horsepower on that thing? And he says, it's classified. And you scratch your head and you say, what's the engine in it? Four-banger, six-cylinder, V8, what are we dealing with? We're not going to give you any information on that. And you're thinking, okay. What about the mileage info, horsepower? And they say, sorry, no specs whatsoever. You have to say to yourself, would you buy that car or truck on good faith? Just because they said, you'll like it or it's going to keep you safe? I think if we're honest with ourselves, we're going to say hell no. If you aren't going to tell me what's going on, then, you can keep your car. And that's what's going on. A lot of the Freedom of Information Act documents, heavily redacted, a lot of the key sentences and paragraphs blacked out. And that's what the American public is getting right now from the Freedom of Information Act. False security from a corrupt and rogue federal government. You've got elements within the various intelligence agencies that have used fear for things, and they say things like even Obama popping a nuke off in Manhattan. It's just a way to garner control over people and harvest the last remaining guaranteed rights of the citizens of this country. And I think you as a listener need to know that ties right into the current push for gun control and magazine limits in this country.
If you're a listener and you're well informed of what the government's been up to, you might question things like the Oklahoma City bombing, what happened at Waco, why did building number 7 fall when it wasn't even hit by a plane. So you're aware that these things are occurring behind the scenes. CNN doesn't cover these things because this is the corruption within the government. When President Obama stands in The Hague and says that he's not worried about Russia, he's worried about a nuclear dirty bomb going off in New York City, that's like an underhanded way of Obama saying to Vladimir Putin of Russia that, hey, we could stage a false flag attack on our soil and blame it on you, and we could start a war with you. It was a threat to Putin, but it was also a threat to the U.S. people. It's creating fear. What if you live in New York City, if you're a listener? You're probably not happy to hear that that's a possibility.
And that's the state of the world right now. And I'm here to tell you, once the guns have been removed from a majority of the population, there's going to be no chance of resistance from political dissidents on the left or the right. And anybody, I think freedom-loving people understand that fundamentally. And that's why it's, protected in the Second Amendment of the United States. And once those guns are gone, let me tell you what, folks, no individual right will be recognized. It's going to be all go along to get along. And you could possibly disappear if, maybe you voice yourself on a radio show or on live television. I mean, that's how spooky of a situation we're dealing with at this point.
And we're right on the cusp of it. They're going down their checklist. They started with the Patriot Act. They knew they needed that first in order to do the intelligence side of it for the gun grab. I mean, this is a planned, staged scenario with the U.S. government that's probably been in the works for maybe even 100 years. Probably more likely, definitely been in the works for the past 30 years that they want the guns. Feinstein says that if she had it her way and had a few more votes, then she would have taken every gun from every, mom and pa in the U.S. They're openly admitting they want to take the guns. Some of them are. They're actively passing little bills to slowly grab stuff, whether they're restricting ammo or if they're restricting, minute parts on a weapon. They're incrementally taking the gun rights away from us. There'll be a day probably in the near future, unless we all stand up, there will be no guns in the U.S. anymore.
And like I said a minute ago, when the guns are gone, your freedom's gone. Because the government can essentially legislate anything they want you to do or say. That's the bottom line. That's why a lot of people, they say, oh, well, y'all are gun nuts, or you hear that phrase thrown around. We're not gun nuts. We just understand you can't resist any kind of tyranny or, an illegal law or legislation that's put into place unless you're prepared to fight and stand up. And unfortunately, and this is kind of a universal language, tyrants, rogue governments, even a common street thug, they understand one language, and that's violence. And when you come at them hard, they reconsider their situation because they understand that, oh, well, I thought you were going to fold, or I thought you were just going to cower down and get on your knees. You come back at them hard with the firearm, and you let them know that they are the ones out of line, and guess what? They reconsider what they're doing. That's the universal language in a fallen world that we live in. And it's unfortunate it's like that, but that's just, like I said, I'm just going to tell the truth.
But part of the reason why we do this radio show is to inform people. We think the number one way to fight back is by the pen. We use our voice to inform other people of what's going on, and I think we've awoken maybe hundreds of people already. And it's great, and this is the way we can give back. If we've obtained this knowledge and maybe not everyone fully understands it, we try to explain it to everyone, and we're fighting back by using, what we've learned from our information. We don't like violence. We don't want violence to ever occur. Violence is a very bad thing that no one wants to see in their nation. The U.S. has been blessed not to have very much of it. We're starting to see a pickup in violence in the cities that have gun restrictions, because without guns to protect yourself, or a means to protect yourself, you're going to see more violence. And this is a fact, actually. You look at statistics for Chicago in particular, and you can see some of those statistics for Washington, D.C. area too, and even in California.
Yeah, in some of these large cities, you've got a death rate just as large annually as Iraq. It's really, it's shocking to think about it. And you aren't going to hear that on the main, news CNN shows, or even Fox. A lot of people think that Fox is, they're covering the things that, now Fox propagates the left-right paradigm, conservative versus liberal.
That's right. And what we're wanting to remind everyone is that one of their mechanisms for controlling the masses is fear. And we're trying to point out specifically, if they can scare you enough, you'll go along with whatever they're planning against us. So fear as a control mechanism is a serious threat to all of us in the United States.
You're right. And we just want to, end the show on the note of put your faith in God and be fearless, because He's the only one that can, affect real change, not phony change that a politician would use in a catch line. Real change. Get your heart right in God's eyes. And thanks for listening to the show tonight.
Last night I heard this politician talking about his brand new mission. Liked his plans, but they came undone when he got around to God and guns. I don't know how he grew up, but it sure wasn't down at the hunting club. 'Cause if it was, he'd understand just a little bit more about the working man. God and guns.